Welcome to Strange Sleep Stories. You found a quiet corner of the internet where the rain never stops falling softly and strange tales drift in like fog. Tonight, as the storm hums outside your window, we'll take a slow, unhurried journey into the unknown. Stories of forgotten legends, curious mysteries, and the things that linger at the edges of memory. Before you begin to drift off, if you enjoy our strange stories, please like the video, leave a comment, and let me know where you're listening from, and subscribe so you never miss a night like this one. But for now, you don't have to do anything at all. Just breathe, settle in, and let the stories begin. Welcome to another quiet journey into the strange, the forgotten, and the softly unsettling. You're listening to boring and strange sleep stories, where history drifts like mist across the mind, and sleep is always welcome to arrive at any moment. Tonight, we follow the trail of one of America's oldest unsolved mysteries, a colony that vanished into the stillness of time. There were no remains, no signs of struggle, just one word carved into a post: Croatoan. You won't need to solve the mystery tonight. You won't even need to stay awake through all of it, okay? Just imagine yourself drifting through the tall pines of a forgotten island where the waves whisper old secrets, and where the stars above once looked down on a colony that simply disappeared. So breathe slowly. Let the sound of the rain calm your thoughts, okay, before sleep takes you. Feel free to like, comment, or subscribe so you can return to more strange and sleepy stories like this one. Now, let's begin. Picture, if you will, a narrow barrier island off the coast of what we now call North Carolina. The waves roll in, unhurried and patient, sculpting the low dunes in slow motion. Salt settles into everything here, into the wind, into the wood, into the skin. And beneath the soft rustle of pine needles overhead, there is a silence. Not an absence of sound, but a different kind of quiet, the kind you feel behind your ribs. It was into this environment that a group of English settlers stepped in the summer of 1587. Over 100 of them, men, women, and children, sent by Sir Walter Raleigh and governed by John White. They were not soldiers or explorers this time, but farmers, craftsmen, and families. It's their task to plant a permanent foothold for England in the New World. This was not the first attempt. 2 previous groups had already come and gone. Their stories faded into cautionary tales. But this colony was meant to endure. They built simple homes with thatched roofs and leaned on one another for support. They brought seeds and tools, books and prayer and hope, perhaps, though it must have worn thin at times. Their settlement was wedged between 2 worlds, between sea and forest, between the rising ambitions of Europe and the quiet sovereignty of native lands. They named their home Roanoke after the island itself, a place of dense woods, shifting sands, and ancient tides, Croatoan territory. It is easy now to imagine the colony as a tidy cluster of cabins and gardens, but the reality would have been more difficult. The ground was sandy and not well suited to European crops. Water sources could be unreliable. Summers were thick with insects. Winters came with wet winds and little shelter from storms. The settlers likely spent their days gathering shellfish, mending nets, kicing off raccoons, and the creeping anxieties that came with every creek in the brush. There were whispers of tension with local tribes, not open hostility, but a steady, strained unease. The English were strangers in a land already occupied. Trade was tentative, trust harder still. Some stories hint that the settlers may have leaned too heavily on native generosity or misunderstood the rhythms of the land. No one knows for certain, and then came the decision that would change everything. John White, the colony's appointed governor and a skilled artist by trade, chose to return to England to gather more supplies. The settlers likely watched his ship disappear into the sea with mixed emotions. Hopeful for help, fearful of being left alone. Among those left behind were White's daughter, Eleanor, and her newborn daughter, Virginia Dare. the first English child born on American soil. White promised to return swiftly, but across the ocean, England was bracing for war. The Spanish Armada loomed, and all ships were commandeered for defense. White's journey back took 3 years, and in that stretch of time, 3 years of storm and uncertainty, Roanoke fell silent. When he finally returned in 1590, his ship's arrival was delayed by rough seas and worsening weather. Days passed before he could safely come ashore, and when he did, he found nothing. The colony was gone. The houses had been carefully dismantled, no signs of burning, no broken furniture left in panic. It did not appear that the settlers had fled. It appeared, instead, as though they had packed up deliberately and left together, but left for where? The only clue was carved into a weathered fence post. The word Croatoan. There was no cross or symbol of distress beside it, something the settlers had agreed they would include if they were under threat. A second, partial inscription, simply the letters CRO, was found on a nearby tree, half swallowed by bark. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, now called Hatteras, in the name of the indigenous people who lived there. White believed the colonists had relocated, perhaps taken in by the tribe, but his attempts to reach Croatoan Island were thwarted by a storm. His ship was damaged, and his men refused to continue. With a heavy heart, White was forced to sail back to England. He would never return, and the settlers of Roanoke were never seen again. What happened to them remains a mystery. Some believe they assimilated into local tribes, adopting new languages, new customs, and a life far from English eyes. Others suspect starvation, disease, or conflict took them, leaving no trace but the forest itself. A few speculate darker forces, unseen or unknowable, that pulled the colony into silence. But there were no bones, no graves, no wreckage, no journals, no footprints in the sand. Only the tall trees and the wind and the word Croatoan etched quietly into wood. Imagine walking those paths today. The soil soft beneath your feet, ferns creeping through what might have once been doorways. The rhythm of the ocean nearby, as if repeating a message in a language long forgotten. The mystery of Roanoke is not a tale of blood or betrayal, but of absence, of time-swallowing certainty, of lives that slipped into another story, one never written down, to invite speculation, but resists conclusion. As we move now deeper into the silence, into the long wait of John White and what he found when he came back. Imagine now the endless gray of the Atlantic in winter. Salt stings the wind, and the sails of the ship swell like lungs holding their breath. On board, John White watches the coastline of England recede, his hands calloused from preparation, his heart heavy with worry. It is the year 1587, and he is leaving behind more than just a colony. He is leaving behind his daughter, Eleanor, and his infant granddaughter, Virginia Dare. White's departure was reluctant, but there was little choice. Supplies had dwindled. Relations with nearby tribes were uncertain. Promises had been made. The colony was to survive. They would need more food, more tools, and more skilled hands. England, however, was no longer at peace. Soon after his return to London, the threat of a Spanish invasion escalated. Queen Elizabeth I, fearing the powerful navy of Spain, issued a stay on all private voyages. Every available ship was seized for national defense. Even those with personal missions, like White's, were grounded or reassigned. Months passed, then years. John White pleaded with officials, sought patrons, tried to charter private vessels. He spent precious time and money watching opportunities fall through one by one. Even when he finally secured passage aboard privateers, the journey was anything but straightforward. His first attempt was a disaster. The ships were attacked by French pirates near the Azores. Supplies were stolen, crewmen killed. White was forced to return to England again. Time always the cruelest ally of mystery, stretched further. Finally, in 1590, 3 full years after leaving Roanoke, John White stepped aboard yet another ship, bound again for the New World. He was older now, and likely thinner, his hair bleached from stress and salt. He imagined, perhaps, the colony welcoming him back with cheers. He imagined his daughter's face. He imagined a town that had survived the wilderness. But what awaited him was not celebration. It was absence. The ship arrived off the Carolina coast in late summer, but the weather was cruel. Hurricanes stalked the region, pushing the vessel out to sea for days at a time. Water became scarce. Morale sank. White begged the captain to allow him ashore, even briefly, even with a skeleton crew. Finally, on August 18th, the day of his granddaughter Virginia's 3rd birthday, he set foot on Roanoke Island once more. The shoreline had changed. The sand was unfamiliar. The wind carried no smoke, no sound of livestock or hammering. The settlement, once rough but lively, was now eerily still. He found remnants of the fortifications. Some of the wooden palisades remained standing, but the houses had been taken apart, not smashed or burned, taken down deliberately, perhaps reused elsewhere. There was no one waiting, no voice calling out, no footprints in the mud, no firewood stacked or gardens growing wild. One word carved into a post, Croatoan. White knew its meaning. The nearby island, it's a friendly tribe. Its agreement that the settlers would leave a message if they had to relocate. He clung to this, clung to it as a hopeful man clings to debris in a storm. He urged his crew to take him to Croatoan Island, now called Hatteras. But the weather had other plans. Another hurricane bore down. The anchor line snapped in rough seas. The ship was damaged, and the crew, already fatigued, refused to risk further harm. John White was forced to leave, never having set foot on Croatoan Island. He returned to England once again, his journey incomplete. He would never see the New World again. In the years that followed, White grew quiet. He faded from public view, publishing a few writings, including maps and illustrations from his earlier voyages. His work as an artist and cartographer, once praised, was now shadowed by the tragedy of the lost colony. There are no records of him ever seeing his daughter again, no letters from Eleanor, no trace of Virginia Dare, the baby whose birth had marked a moment of pride for the English. Empire was now a ghost in the annals of history. White died sometime after 1593, alone, perhaps, or simply forgotten. History will remember him as the man who tried to return and couldn't. It's tempting to view White's story as a tale of failure, a mission undone. But it is also a portrait of endurance, of persistence in the face of bureaucracy, warfare, and nature itself. He carried hope with him across an ocean more than once, only to find silence waiting, and that silence endures. We do not know what John White dreamed in his final years. Perhaps he imagined a quiet cabin on Croatoan Island, where Eleanor lived in peace. Perhaps he envisioned Virginia running barefoot along the shore, hair sun-bleached, her voice fluent in a language he never learned. Or perhaps he dreamed only of the trees still and tall, holding the memories he could never retrieve. Sleep often does what history cannot. It lets us reunite what was lost, if only for a moment. And now, as we leave John White behind, let us shift our focus, not to the searchers, but to those who stayed behind. What was it really like to live in that small colony, so far from home? Let's step into their shoes next and follow the rhythm of their days. Now, imagine you are there. The year is 1587. The soil is unfamiliar beneath your feet, looser, more silty than what you knew back in Devon or Dorset. You wake to the sound of gulls over the water and a breeze slipping through pine needles. There are no chiming bells, no church towers in the distance, soft groan of the palisade gate and the distant sigh of the ocean. This is Roanoke. Life in the colony begins at first light. There is no time for idleness. Every hour must be used. You gather firewood, dig for clams, inspect the thatching on your roof. You check the small gardens where unfamiliar vegetables struggle in the sandy loam. You keep an eye on the surrounding forest, always aware that movement may mean deer or something else. There are few luxuries. Meals are simple: cornmeal porridge, sometimes fish, occasionally a bird snared in the brush. Tea, when available, is made from bark or pine needles. The smell is sharp and green, comforting in its own way. Water is drawn from a well, often warm and metallic in taste. It must be boiled, always. Evening brings a brief pause. Families huddle near cooking fires, recounting the day in soft voices. Candles are precious. Many rely on firelight alone. The children are quieter now. The excitement of a new world has been worn down by its demands. You notice that tools wear faster here. The salt air rusts iron quickly, and you've begun to sharpen blades with stones from the riverbank. Clothing frays from labor. Repairs are constant. Patch your neighbor's tunic with sinew and stubborn thread, humming an old song you once heard in a tavern back home. But here, the old world feels far away. There is beauty in the wilderness, of course. The air is rich with the smell of cedar and honeysuckle. At night, the stars blaze without rival, untamed by city smoke. You can trace constellations from your childhood and imagine your loved ones back in England doing the same. And during quiet moments, rare as they are, you can hear the wind ripple through the grass and reeds in a rhythm that feels almost sacred. But there is also fear. The colony is not alone. The forests are vast and full of life, much of it unknown to the settlers. Indigenous tribes watch from a distance, sometimes interacting, sometimes retreating. You do not understand their language, and they do not trust yours. Trade is tense, but necessary. It's corn, beans, venison. These are exchanged for beads, cloth, and tools. Misunderstandings are common. A gesture seen as kindness might be read as intrusion. And stories circulate. Stories whispered after dark, of warriors in paint, of spirits in the woods, of ancient things that do not welcome settlers. Most of these stories are passed along by torchlight, voices low, eyes darting to the edge of camp. And the land, too, resists in its own way. Storms come with little warning, bending trees and washing away progress overnight. One week, your well is full. The next, brackish. You learn not to rely on anything staying the same for long. As the months drag on, patterns begin to emerge. A few small children begin speaking words from the local Algonquian dialect. They learn quickly, more quickly than their parents. These are the same children who collect berries and follow animal tracks with a kind of quiet, natural understanding. The settlers themselves begin to change. Clothing becomes patched with local materials, deerskin and woven reeds. Homes are adapted with tribal building techniques. Some colonists begin to suggest moving further inland where the soil might be better, where the forest offers more game. The idea is met with hesitation. Some are still holding out for John White's return. They believe he will come. Others are less certain. Over time, a difficult truth settles over the community. Help may not come, and so decisions are made, quietly, gradually. The colony begins to split, some families choosing to remain, others preparing to travel south, perhaps to Croatoan Island. Where relations with the local tribes seem warmer, they leave no formal goodbye, just a carved word left behind where they once gathered, Croatoan. What is striking when you imagine the rhythm of their days is how ordinary much of it must have felt. The way human beings normalize their world, even as that world shifts beneath their feet. The way they keep raising children, washing clothes, patching shoes, and watching the sky, waiting for sails that never appear on the horizon. There is no record of violence at the Roanoke site. No charred wood, no broken weapons, no signs of forced flight, just the weathered palisade, a few iron tools, a carved message, and then the forest. And so the colony slipped away, not in blood or fire, but slowly, absorbed by the land or by the lives of others. Perhaps the settlers found refuge. Perhaps they were welcomed. Perhaps they became something else entirely, neither English nor native, but a quiet blend of both. And now, as we gently step back from the fires of that vanished village, we turn our attention to the ground beneath our feet. What does the earth remember? What do the bones and artifacts whisper beneath layers of time? Let us move now to the realm of science, of DNA, of oral histories passed through generations. What traces, if any, remain? In time, the trees grew taller, and the winds of Roanoke Island swept clean the traces of footpaths and fire pits. The silence settled deep into the ground. And yet, centuries later, the questions linger. Where did they go? And, just as important, what, if anything, did they leave behind? The first clues, as with so many mysteries, lie in stories. Not written, but spoken, passed from parent to child in the low firelight of other villages, other people. For some native tribes along the Carolina coast, particularly the Lumbee and the Hatteras, oral histories have long told of pale-skinned ancestors, of English names and prayers woven into their traditions. Elders spoke of blue-eyed children who appeared among their people, of old English words lingering in tribal speech. These stories are quiet, unassuming things, easy to overlook. In them lives the possibility that the Roanoke colonists did not die, but merged, blended slowly into the cultures around them, losing one identity, perhaps, to find another. Modern science eventually turned its eye toward these whispers. In the early 2000s, researchers began analyzing the genetic lineages of local populations, looking for traces of European ancestry. It was not a simple task. DNA degrades over time, and without graves or artifacts clearly tied to the colonists, comparisons remain speculative. Some Lumbee individuals do carry a mix of European, indigenous, and African markers, evidence of complex and layered ancestry. But DNA alone does not solve Roanoke's mystery. Instead, it gestures, it hints, suggests that the boundaries between groups were never as sharp as maps would have them. It reminds us that people move, adapt, and sometimes disappear, not in catastrophe, but in quiet transformation. Archaeology, too, has had its say. On Hatteras Island, once called Croatoan, excavations have revealed curious findings. A 16th century English signet ring, its fragments of copper, far from any English fort. An iron rapier hilt, mismatched among traditional native tools. Not enough to declare certainty, but enough to feed the theory that at least some of the settlers made it to Croatoan and lived there for a time. Nearby, at Site X, near the Albemarle Sound, another excavation turned up pottery fragments of English origin, mixed with native ware. Some of the shards bore signs of having been reworked or repurposed. This too tells a story, not of survival, perhaps, but of adaptation, of two worlds brushing up against each other, leaving behind a faint seam in the archaeological fabric. These artifacts are small, modest, a bit of metal here, bead there, but in a story built on a single carved word, they speak volumes. Some historians have suggested that the disappearance was not one event, but many, that the colonists may have split into smaller groups. Some might have died of starvation or illness. Others could have joined friendly tribes and vanished into oral traditions. A few, perhaps, tried to move north or inland and were never heard from again. The Carolina swamps are vast, and time devours paper, bone, and memory. And yet, others still seek more unusual explanations. Some believe the word Croatoan has appeared elsewhere. It's carved into Edgar Allan Poe's belongings, scrawled in odd places connected to to disappearances. These links are likely coincidence, but in the dark hours, when rain falls and the forest leans in close, they capture the imagination. Others lean on more esoteric theories of supernatural vanishings, of curses, or dimensional tears. These stories persist not because they are proven, but because the vacuum left by mystery always draws in myth. But for every theory, be it practical or paranormal, the same question persists. What does it mean to truly vanish? Night deepens and your thoughts begin to drift. Let this final reflection guide you. The mystery of Roanoke endures not because it was loud or violent, but because it was quiet. A community simply gone. No trace of terror. No last desperate letter. Just one word, carved by hand, left to the wind. Croatoan. That one word is both map and memory. It leads to an island, but also into the deep woods of history, where the line between fact and legend grows soft, where identities shift like riverbanks, and survival sometimes means becoming something else entirely. And so, we come to the end of our journey, though not the end of the mystery. Roanoke remains lost to the night, but perhaps not to time. And now, as we return from Roanoke's wild coast, feel the weight of the present settle gently around you. The wind outside your window is just wind, with the darkness only sleep arriving. Tonight, you have walked through a forest where no paths remain, past empty palisades and into a mystery that has rested beneath the trees for more than 400 years. Okay? There is peace in the not knowing. Let your thoughts grow quiet now. You dream of a lost colony tonight. May it be in calm scenes, a child playing by the river, a campfire gently smoking under stars, or a carved word softened by moss. Thank you for listening to Boring and Strange Sleep Stories. Until next time, imagine yourself walking alone in a quiet forest. The trees form a green canopy overhead, and the light filters gently through the leaves, dappling the mossy ground in shifting patterns. The only sounds are the soft crunch of your boots on fallen needles and the distant chirping of birds. You've wandered far from the main trail. The forest is still peaceful, but then something catches your eye. There, just ahead, is a staircase, a full set of steps, old, weathered wood, or maybe stone standing in the middle of nowhere. No house, no ruins, just stairs, rising silently into nothing. It's not grand. It doesn't feel threatening, but it doesn't belong here. You pause, tilt your head. Why would anyone build stairs out here in the middle of untouched woods? Tonight, we're going to explore stories just like that, calmly and quietly. We'll walk through the mystery of strange stairs found in remote places, listen to those who've worked in deep wilderness areas, and look into the lives of the people who once shaped the trails we still walk today. We'll close with a grounded look at possible explanations, old structures, forgotten stations, and practical realities obscured by time. You don't need to believe in anything supernatural to follow along. This is a story about the edges of maps and about what we leave behind when we carve our way through the wilderness. So, settle in. Let the quiet of the forest guide your thoughts. And let's begin with the mystery that started it all. The stairs in the woods. Imagine yourself deep in a national forest. The trail behind you has narrowed into a footpath, and even that seems to disappear between gnarled tree roots and undergrowth. You aren't lost, not really, but you are far from the sounds of civilization. No cars, no humming power lines. It's just the forest, thick and breathing all around you. It's peaceful, but heavy, like the woods are holding their breath. And then, through the trees, something unexpected. A staircase, not debris, not collapsed ruins, but an actual set of stairs standing upright, sturdy, intact. Sometimes wood, sometimes stone, occasionally metal, with curling supports and ornamental details, but always alone. No walls, no doors, no buildings, just stairs. They rise from the forest floor and go nowhere. It's a story you'll find whispered all over the internet, especially in places where people trade strange experiences, camping forums, Reddit threads, and wilderness survival groups. Over the past decade, these sightings have become a kind of quiet phenomenon. No viral videos, no blockbuster documentaries, just countless versions of the same quiet encounter. One well-known account comes from a man who claimed to have worked with a federal search and rescue unit in the United States. Over the course of his years responding to missing hiker calls, he said he'd encountered at least half a dozen sets of stairs. His colleagues, he insisted, knew about them too. They didn't talk much about it, but when they found one, they simply gave it space. One rule: don't climb them. No one said why. Other stories describe rangers finding stairs while mapping new trails, often in places where no known settlements had ever existed. These weren't crumbled remnants of cabins. The structures were often well built, precise, clean, even almost too clean. One report described finding a staircase in the Smoky Mountains where the surrounding leaves had gathered in thick piles. But the steps themselves were bare, as if recently swept. In Alaska, a team of wildlife researchers stumbled on a stone staircase half buried in moss. Each step was wide and shallow, worn down as though many feet had once used them. But there was nothing at the top. No overlook, no platform, just more forest. They marked the location on their map, but the coordinates led to nothing when later checked from the air. No visible structure, no break in the tree line. It was as if the stairs had folded back into the forest when no one was looking. Not all the stairs are aged or moss-covered. Some hikers have reported finding stairs that look new, which still light and smooth, with no signs of wear or weathering. One unsettling story told of a narrow spiral staircase made of iron, painted white, standing in a sunlit glade with no path leading to it and no signs of rust. When the hiker returned a week later, the clearing was empty. People shared these stories with a kind of hushed reverence, not because they believe in supernatural forces, many of them don't, but because the stairs feel like they belong to another reality, something older, or maybe something forgotten. Some think they are remnants of old buildings lost to time mansions, fire towers, logging camps, hunting lodges where only the stairs were made well enough to survive. But even this explanation doesn't fully account for the location of some sightings in floodplains, high ridges, or areas with no record of construction, not even temporary camps. Others propose more abstract theories. Some suggest the stairs are psychological markers, traps of the mind, that those who spend too long in isolation begin to see patterns where there are none. Some say the stairs are liminal spaces, thresholds between one kind of world and another, places where time doesn't quite behave. Folklore offers its own quiet warnings. In Appalachian regions, staircases in the woods are sometimes whispered about in relation to witch steps, structures that lead nowhere, meant to confuse spirits or trap something beneath them. In parts of rural Scandinavia, stairs found in forests are linked to old rites, possibly tied to places where buildings once housed the sick, the mad, or the cursed. Of course, most accounts don't claim anything overtly strange happened. People see the stairs, they stop, they look. They might walk away unsettled or curious. Sometimes they climb them, always cautiously, and find nothing. But occasionally, someone reports feeling watched, or returning to the same place later and finding the stairs gone. Not gone like moved, but gone like erased, as if the forest decided to take them back. What makes these stories linger is not fear, but dissonance. The sense that something in the natural world doesn't match what we expect, so that we can't explain every nail, every stone, and that sometimes, even now, we still find things in the woods that weren't in the guidebook. As we prepare to move on, hold that image gently in your mind. An ordinary set of stairs, deep in the forest, quiet and alone, leading nowhere. In our next segment, we'll trade anonymous stories for first-hand accounts. We'll explore what it's like to spend a lifetime in these wild spaces through the words of those who work there. Rangers, fire watchers, and remote trail workers who have stumbled upon far more than fallen logs or lost hikers. They've seen what the wilderness hides and what it remembers. Imagine the rhythm of days spent entirely in the wilderness, waking before dawn to mist-covered trails, boiling coffee over a portable stove, checking maps by lantern light. The job of a forest ranger or fire lookout isn't glamorous. It's measured, quiet, and filled with long stretches of silence, broken only by the low call of a distant bird or the groan of wind through pines. But for those who have spent months or even years living in national parks and wilderness preserves, the forest becomes a kind of companion. And in that stillness, they see things most of us never do, just over the years. Stories have quietly surfaced from rangers and fire watchers who've encountered the strange and inexplicable. Not dramatic encounters, but subtle ones, enough to linger in the memory. They speak of places that feel off, of odd noises at night, of finding small objects in the woods where no one should have been. Take, for example, the recollection of a retired Forest Service ranger named Eli, who spent decades monitoring sections of forest in northern Maine. In an interview preserved in an obscure oral history archive, he describes finding an old stone staircase one autumn while scouting fire break lines. It was tucked in a hollow near a brook, each stone neatly stacked, moss creeping along the edges. With no sign of a cabin or any other structure nearby, Eli didn't feel afraid, just confused. He marked it with a small flag and made note of it in his journal. The next year, he returned to the same spot. The brook was still there, the trees unchanged, but the staircase was gone. Not broken or collapsed, simply not there. He flipped back through his notebook to confirm the location, but could find no trace. Forrest took it back, he said with a shrug, as if the land itself sometimes decides what stays and what disappears. Then there's Marlene, a seasonal ranger who worked the high ridges of Shenandoah in the late 1990s. She recounts a time she was assigned to locate a missing hiker. Routine work, often resolved with a call or walk back to a nearby road, but this case led her deep into a dense thicket where few trails ran. There, through the trees, she saw something strange, a rusted spiral staircase rising out of the brush, its railing twisted with vines. There was no sign of the hiker, but nearby, under a log, she found a neatly folded map and a working compass, both dried despite the recent rain. She marked the coordinates, but when her partner returned with a GPS unit, they found only thicket and roots. She never saw the staircase again. For many rangers, the truly unsettling experiences are the ones that don't make sense. Not because they're dramatic, but because they're quiet. A blueprint where no one has been in days. A radio crackling with voices that aren't on the assigned frequency. The distant sound of footsteps when no one's scheduled to be on patrol. In the vast forests of the Pacific Northwest, a ranger named Daniel once worked as part of a fire suppression crew. During a routine walk along a ridge trail near an old lookout station, he spotted what looked like concrete steps, maybe 6 or 7 of them, jutting from the ground. He assumed they were part of a long-gone foundation, but when he bent down to inspect them, he realized they didn't lead up or down. They were simply wedged into the slope, embedded into soil, with no beginning and no end. He took a photo. Later, when he tried to show his crew, the image showed only brush and loose dirt. The stairs weren't visible. It was just one of those things, he said later. You see it, and then you don't, but you remember it. These aren't ghost stories. The rangers themselves don't claim hauntings or visions. Instead, their words are measured, factual, even slightly bored. They speak of these oddities the way one might speak of an unusual weather pattern or a strange tree formation. Remarkable, yes, but part of the landscape. And that may be what makes these stories linger. These are people trained to observe, to record, to report. They know how to recognize a collapsed hunting cabin. They know what old fire tower debris looks like when they say something felt out of place. It's worth noting, there are countless survival stories, too, of being caught in sudden snowstorms, of losing radio contact, of stumbling onto forgotten trails not listed on any map. The wilderness is vast and indifferent. Survival in it requires a constant, quiet alertness, a respect for terrain, weather, and distance. For many who work in it, the forest becomes less a threat and more a puzzle, an ancient system of growth and decay, always shifting. Some rangers believe the stairs are simply remnants, forgotten bits of human structure reclaimed by time. Others aren't so sure, but regardless of belief, there's a common understanding. When you work in the deep woods long enough, you will see something you can't explain. Perhaps a staircase that shouldn't be there. Perhaps something even quieter, an absence, a silence, a path that turns just a bit too sharply. So they walk on. They make their notes, and they leave the stairs alone. Next, we'll travel back nearly a century to a time when the American wilderness was being carved into trails and camps by hand. In our third segment, you'll see why it was no easy thing to be part of a civilian Conservation Corps trail crew, and why some of the strange structures left behind still stand hidden in our forests today. Picture yourself waking up in a canvas tent, stiff from sleep on a bedroll filled with straw. The morning air is cold, the kind of cold that settles in your joints. Outside, mist clings low to the ground, and your breath clouds in front of you. There's no time to stretch or sit in silence. A whistle sounds. It's 5 a.m. You're part of the Civilian Conservation Corps, just one of hundreds of thousands of young men who joined up during the Great Depression. Maybe you signed up for a hot meal, or maybe because there were no jobs back home. Maybe you were 17 and had no idea what you were getting into. Either way, you're here now, assigned to a remote forest camp, miles from the nearest town. The CCC was one of Franklin D. Roosevelt's most ambitious New Deal programs. It's launched in 1933 to fight unemployment while improving America's public lands. Its purpose was noble, but the work was brutal. Each morning began with roll call, breakfast, and a long march into the woods with tools slung over your shoulder axes, picks, shovels, and sometimes primitive surveying gear. There were no power tools, no trucks to shuttle you from site to site. Just the clink of tools and the sound of boots on packed dirt. Your job was to build the bones of the wilderness infrastructure we still use today. Trails, stone steps, fire towers, drainage systems, lookout posts. Sometimes you'd be laying logs across a muddy path to make a crude bridge. Other days, hauling quarried stone for miles to stack into walls or stairways along a steep slope. You'd spend weeks building a trail switch, back by switchback, foot by foot. It wasn't glamorous. Hands blistered, shoulders ached. Days bled together in cycles of labor and rest, work and sleep. The forest didn't offer much comfort. Mosquitoes in the summer, sleet in the fall. Wild animals always nearby. If something went wrong, there was no quick escape. If you got sick, you might have to wait for someone to ride out for help. And then there were the woods themselves, deep and old, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel restful, but watchful. You might have come into this job with a little fear of the wild, but after a few weeks, even the bravest workers felt the weight of that silence. Long hours digging trails through dense undergrowth gave you too much time to think. Some men swore they heard footsteps in the night, not animals, but deliberate human steps. Others spoke of seeing shapes in the fog that didn't make sense. Tall forms that vanished when approached, or fires in places no one should be. It's easy now to brush that off as exhaustion or the tricks of light in a dense forest. But for a CCC trail crew living under canvas, far from any town, strange stories were part of campfire talk. And sometimes they'd stumble on things they couldn't explain. a set of stone stairs on a ridge, leading nowhere. Too well made to be random, too remote to be part of a cabin. An iron door set into a hillside, locked and rusted shut, with no sign of a road or path leading to it. Half-buried posts or footings in places no map marked. Most times, they ignored them. The job wasn't to ask questions. It was to dig, to build, and to keep your head down. The stairs some rangers see today may well have been built by the CCC. They were, after all, known for constructing elegant stone steps into forest paths, each rock chiseled and placed by hand. But time has a way of stripping context. Fires swept through the woods. Roads were rerouted. Cabins collapsed. And all that remained were the stairs, practical ones, now strangely surreal. Imagine laying those stones yourself, knowing your name won't be remembered. Imagine how many of those structures now lie beneath vines, buried by leaves, or exposed like skeletal remains after a landslide. The CCC left its mark on the land, but so many of those young workers left nothing else. No legacy, quiet strength, spent in service to something larger, something that often felt indifferent. It's easy to romanticize their lives now, but the truth is that it was hard, cold, and sometimes frightening. They weren't just building trails, they were taming pieces of the wild, one step at a time, okay? And in doing so, they sometimes uncovered things they didn't want to talk about. Today, when hikers stumble across a perfect set of stone stairs rising into nothingness, they might be touching the work of those hands. Those tired, unsung laborers who lived by the rhythm of the woods. And while the land may have changed and the sounds of pickaxes have long faded, their ghosts remain, not in a haunted sense, but in the quiet persistence of what they built, what still stands. Now, let's move gently into our final segment, a rational look at what these strange forest stairs might actually be. Because, as alluring as the mystery is, there may be more mundane explanations, more grounded histories. Let's pull back the veil and explore the science, the geography, and the slow, forgetful nature of the land itself. Let's imagine stepping back from the stories now, from the eerie accounts, the ranger recollections, the long-forgotten labor camps. Let's set the mood in a different way. You're seated at the edge of a clearing. In front of you, a moss-covered staircase rises from the ground. It's real. You can touch the stones, feel the coolness where a sun hasn't reached. It feels mysterious, but is it? In this final segment, we gently pull back from the mystery to examine what may lie beneath it, both literally and historically. Because while the stairs in the woods often feel like something out of a dream, they may have very real, very human explanations. To start, consider that the American wilderness hasn't always been wild. The forests that stretch across regions like the Appalachians, the Ozarks, and the Pacific Northwest were once dotted with settlements, logging camps, mining operations, fire towers, even entire towns that no longer exist. Over the decades, many of these communities were abandoned, destroyed by fire, or quietly reclaimed by nature. One of the most common explanations for stairs to nowhere is simple. Their foundations, or more precisely, what's left after everything else has fallen. Wood rots, shingles collapse, walls give way. But stairs, often made of stone or poured concrete, are built to endure. In older building designs, stairs were among the first components laid, and among the few designed to carry the full weight of movement over time. So when nature reclaims a home, it often leaves the stairs behind. Some of these stairs may have once led to second floors of ranger cabins, fire lookout platforms, or small administrative buildings tucked into mountain ridges. Others may have belonged to homesteads from the early 20th century, built on public land before zoning and environmental restrictions began tightening access. In forested regions like Pennsylvania or West Virginia, abandoned mining sites can leave behind more than just shafts. Stonework, especially stairs, was often used to reach different elevation levels along a slope. When operations ceased, the structures were stripped or left to decay. Without signs or markers, a lone set of stairs might be all that remains to suggest a structure ever existed. There are even cases where the stairs were part of planned development that never materialized. During the early conservation movement, ambitious plans were drawn for lodges, observation points, and mountaintop resorts. Funding ran out. Access roads eroded. The projects halted. Kate, the first steps, quite literally, were sometimes already built. Geologists and archaeologists, too, have chimed in on this phenomenon. Some stairs may not be stairs at all. In limestone-rich regions, natural formations known as terracing or stepped rock can resemble human-made staircases. The slow, orderly erosion of sediment layers, combined with plant growth and leaf litter, can create shapes that look purposeful even when they're not. One ranger from Arkansas recounted hiking to what he believed was an old homestead, only to find that the stairs were actually layers of shell broken in straight angles by frost and water. Other explanations are rooted in infrastructure. The U.S. Forest Service and National Park Service, especially during the mid-1900s, experimented with various outposts and hidden stations. These included weather data collection posts, fire break observation platforms, and communication lines. If a lookout tower was decommissioned, its metal body might be taken apart for reuse, but the base, the concrete, often left behind. Some staircases may also be the remnants of secretive government or private installations, such as cold warrior monitoring stations or bootlegger hideouts during Prohibition. While not common, these fringe structures did exist, particularly in remote wooded areas near state lines or borders. Cultural anthropologists remind us that indigenous peoples also built structures deep in forested areas, though few involve freestanding stairs. In some cases, sacred spaces or ritual sites may have included earthen or stone platforms, now mistaken for part of colonial or modern architecture. Ultimately, what the stairs in the woods remind us of is how quickly we forget the layers beneath the surface. The woods are not blank. They are palimpsests, landscapes written over again and again, each generation leaving a mark, most of which fade, and occasionally something survives. A staircase, a post, okay? A footprint made from stone, okay? Because it stands alone, it seems out of place. It's also worth considering the role of the human mind in these encounters. In unfamiliar terrain, especially when walking alone or tired, the brain seeks patterns. When we come across something unexpected, a geometric shape in nature, a line too straight, an angle too clean, it can feel uncanny. It's not necessarily because it's threatening, but because it breaks the rhythm. Psychologists describe this as cognitive dissonance in natural settings. The wilderness is curved, soft, organic. Staircase is not. Even if it's explainable, the contrast is enough to unsettle. And yet, perhaps that's part of the beauty of it. We live in a world where most things can be traced, tagged, or explained. But in the woods, time stretches, records blur, and the forest does not explain itself. So whether the stairs you find in the wild were once the entryway to a ranger's home, it's the first step of an abandoned project, or merely a trick of erosion in stone, they serve the same purpose. They invite you to pause, to wonder, to question what else lies beneath the surface. And sometimes that is enough. As the trees close in and the last segment draws to a close, let's return to the quiet of the present moment. In our conclusion, we'll gently reflect on what these stories mean, not as proof of the paranormal, but as reminders that even the quietest landscapes hold echoes of past lives, okay, and that mystery, in its softest form, is all around us. And now, here we are, near the end of the trail. The forest is still around us. The light has faded, but the hush remains, like a soft breath held between trees. You've walked through strange stories and quiet lives. You've seen the mystery, the labor, the explanations, and the spaces in between. The stairs in the woods are more than just a curiosity, Okay? They are, in many ways, a mirror, reflecting how little we sometimes know about the landscapes we think are untouched. They remind us that the wilderness isn't empty, it's layered, it's lived in, and it's always changing. Some of those stairs may be the last standing remains of a fire lookout or trail station. Others may be ruins of private homes, forgotten projects, or vanished mining operations. Still others, perhaps, are simply stone formations we interpret through the lens of pattern-seeking minds. But even when there is a rational explanation, the feeling they evoke, the quiet unease, the subtle wonder, remains. There's something about seeing a staircase rise from moss and ferns, disconnected from time or function, that makes you pause. And that pause is the point. It's in these moments of pause, of reflection, that mystery thrives. Not in horror, not in fear, but in stillness. The kind of mystery that allows your thoughts to drift, that nudges your imagination gently just before sleep. Tonight, as you rest, you may carry with you the image of those forgotten stairs, weathered, quiet, surrounded by trees, a marker of lives long past, of labor done by lantern light, of stories lost to time. Maybe someone once sat on those steps to tie their boots. Maybe they were the first step toward something never finished. Or maybe they simply are what they appear to be, part of the landscape now, neither haunted nor sacred, just there. And perhaps, like so many things in life, they don't need to be explained to matter. So let the sound of the forest return. Let the image of moss-covered stone fade softly from your mind. You are safe. You are home. The stairs remain out there somewhere in the quiet places, and the woods, as always, will keep their secrets. Sleep well. Welcome. Tonight, you'll be drifting through quiet skies and fading contrails across a time when the world was at war. But the skies held something more than aircraft and clouds. The Second World War conjures vivid images of massive naval fleets, rumbling tanks, and fighter planes in the air. But beyond these familiar engines of war, there were stranger things reported. Things whispered in hangars, passed quietly between squadrons, and filed away in official documents under curious titles. Among them, the Foo Fighters, strange, glowing orbs, spheres of fire, objects that followed warplanes, paced them, sometimes even darted around them with unnatural precision. They appeared over France, Germany, the Pacific, and beyond. The pilots who saw them came from both Allied and Axis powers. They were seasoned, trained, often frightened, but rarely fanciful, and yet they all reported the same thing. Something was out there tonight. We explore their stories, not to frighten, but to understand, not to thrill, but to trace the gentle ripple of mystery through one of the most documented conflicts in human history. We'll begin with the cultural backdrop of the time, where science was racing ahead and skies were becoming more crowded than ever before. Then, we'll meet the airmen, tired, dutiful, and often skeptical, who bore witness to these things. We'll imagine what it was like to be in their boots, in the clouds, peering into the dark, watching something impossible pace your wing. And at last, we'll turn calmly toward the evidence. What has science offered in the decades since? What remains uncertain? So take a deep breath. Let your mind drift above the clouds. The engines hum steadily. The world below fades into a soft blur. And somewhere, just outside the cockpit window, something small and glowing drifts alongside. Let's begin. Imagine the world in late 1944. The war is still raging, but its outcome is beginning to take shape. The Allied forces are pressing deeper into Europe. The skies are full, not just of clouds and smoke, but of machines. Cadence-engine bombers, long-range reconnaissance aircraft, single-prop fighters, endless streams of metal and men moving across vast swaths of sky. Pilots fly long missions in the cold, often in silence, often alone. Most are young, many are tired, and all are trained to focus on the known enemy aircraft. Flak bursts, fuel gauges, navigation, instruments, weather, But then, something new begins to appear. At first, the reports are cautious. Strange lights, glowing balls, objects that follow planes at high speed but never attack. They hover, they pulse, dart away, only to reappear minutes later, sometimes on the opposite wing. No one wants to report them officially, yet pilots begin to murmur to one another in hangars and mess halls. Quiet conversations that start with, "Did you see it too?" The term Foo Fighter emerges from the 415th Night Fighter Squadron, stationed over the Rhine Valley. The name itself is borrowed from a nonsense phrase in a then popular comic strip, Smokey Stover, whose character was always exclaiming, "Where there's food, there's fire." It's an inside joke, a way of naming the unnameable, and maybe of making it a little less frightening. But what the crews describe is not funny. They describe glowing orbs of orange, red, or white, sometimes flickering like a flame, sometimes shining with a dull, almost metallic light. The objects appear at altitude, often pacing their aircraft from behind or just off the wingtip, matching speed, mimicking maneuvers, never falling away. They don't appear to be affected by wind or gravity. They don't show up on radar, and they don't make a sound. For a while, some speculate that they might be German weapons, perhaps new air mines or remote-controlled probes. But as it turns out, German pilots are seeing them too. So are British squadrons flying night patrols over France. So are Japanese pilots in the Pacific, who report them as strange balls of fire that danced above the sea. It's this shared confusion, this international recognition of the same impossible thing, that gives the phenomenon a curious weight. If it were just one side, it might be dismissed as a trick. If it were just one pilot, it could be a mistake. But across continents, across languages and uniforms, these glowing presences are being seen by trained observers in highly controlled conditions. They appear most often at night, in still air, on quiet, solitary missions. But they never interfere. They don't shoot. They don't crash, They don't even seem to acknowledge the aircraft they follow. They simply appear, and then vanish. Commanders, unsure how to respond, instruct crews to document sightings, but not engage. Investigations are launched quietly. Reports are filed, labeled as anomalies or atmospheric phenomena, but there is no consistent explanation. Some believe they are natural, perhaps a new form of St. Elmo's fire, a known electrical discharge that clings to ship masts and aircraft frames during thunderstorms. Others suggest the lights are ball lightning, a rare and unpredictable weather event. But these theories don't fully satisfy the pilots who've seen the Foo Fighters move, Ball lightning doesn't pace a plane at 300 miles per hour, and it certainly doesn't bank in formation. As 1945 approaches, the number of sightings increases. Some crews begin referring to them as Kraut fireballs. Others call them bogies or sky ghosts. But all agree on one thing: they're not imagined. They are real. They are visible, and they don't belong to any nation. In time, the stories bleed into post-war folklore. The Foo Fighters become a kind of military ghost story, a wartime curiosity, eventually eclipsed by the wave of UFO reports that follow in the decades ahead. But these early accounts are different in tone. They are not excited or dramatic. They are quiet, earnest, laced with a kind of disciplined discomfort, as though even the telling of the story was dangerous. The Foo Fighters live in that liminal space between technology and myth, between known and unknown. They came at a time when the world was already stretched thin with fear, yet they seem to exist apart from that fear. Neither helpful nor harmful, neither mechanical nor mystical, only present, and so the mystery remained, quietly observed, occasionally recorded, left unexplained. Next, we shift from the skies in general to one particular squadron in one particular night. Mission not unlike a dozen others, until something strange appeared just off the wing. The 415th Night Fighter Squadron was not the sort of unit that attracted attention outside the airfields. They operated in near total darkness, both literally and metaphorically, while other squadrons made headlines with dogfights and daring daytime raids. The 415th specialized in the kind of flying that most people never saw: night patrols, silent intercepts. Radar-guided shadow runs over enemy terrain. It was a cold, thankless job. It's the kind of work that kept men alert for hours, staring into black skies filled with things that didn't want to be seen. Mistaken identity was common. Fatigue was constant. And still, the missions went on. By the winter of 1944, the squadron was based in Dijon, France, an airfield carved from frozen ground and patched with temporary shelters. The war was entering its final stages, though no one could have known that at the time. The Battle of the Bulge had just begun. The German resistance was still fierce. The nights were long, bitter, and unpredictable. On one such night, a Bristol bullfighter lifted off the runway in silence. The crew, a pilot, and a radar observer. Both were veterans of dozens of missions. Both had learned to trust their instruments as much as their instincts. The bullfighter was heavy, twin-engined, bristling with radar equipment, and powerful enough to climb above cloud cover in a matter of minutes. They were tasked with a routine patrol across a wide arc of territory northeast of the base. Standard stuff, watching for enemy bombers, intercepting anything moving through the dark. 20 minutes into the flight, something appeared on the radar screen, a faint contact. Faint, but solid. It held position at 5 o'clock high, just behind and slightly above their tail. It was moving too smoothly for a weather anomaly, and it didn't respond to identification signals. The radar operator glanced up from the scope and peered into the black behind him. At first, nothing. Then, there it was. A light, small, orange, perfectly round, not flashing, not pulsing, just there. It hovered at a distance that was both safe and disconcerting, close enough to see clearly, far enough to evade attack. It made no sound. It left no trail. It did not behave like any aircraft known to either side. The pilot adjusted course. Curious, the light followed. He dipped altitude sharply, testing. The light followed. He banked left, then right, then looped wide into a slow spiral. Light mirrored every move. They contacted ground command to report an unidentified visual. The reply was brief. Continue patrol. Less engaged. Do not engage. They were alone, thousands of feet above the sleeping world, and something was watching them. The pilot tried evasive maneuvers, tight turns, sudden dives, throttling forward, then back. The object remained steady, as if tethered to their aircraft by something unseen. It held its place, not like a machine, but like a thought, always exactly where it wanted to be. The light stayed with them for nearly 10 minutes. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. No flash, no speed blur, no indication of departure. It simply wasn't there anymore. The men sat in silence for the rest of the flight. Back at base, they filed a report, somewhat hesitantly. They weren't the only ones, okay? Over the next several weeks, multiple crews from the same squadron began describing similar sightings. Always at night, always off the wingtip, always silent. Some reports described orbs. Others described long, cigar-shaped lights with no visible structure. A few claimed the objects played with their aircraft, darting ahead, dropping back, weaving between imaginary lines in the sky like dancers in a show meant for no one. The squadron's commanding officer, Captain Harold Augsburger, authorized the inclusion of these accounts in formal mission debriefs. He encouraged pilots not to speculate in writing, but not to leave things out either. As he later remarked in a letter, we knew the difference between flag and fantasy. And whatever this was, it was consistent. These were not untrained observers. They were not civilian witnesses glimpsing strange shapes through bedroom windows. These were pilots in combat aircraft, trained to identify and respond to known aerial threats using radar and visual confirmation in controlled airspace. Their testimonies held weight, not because they were sensational, but because they weren't. They were flat, procedural, reluctantly detailed. The U.S. Army began quietly cataloging the reports. Analysts considered everything: new enemy aircraft, experimental weather balloons, even psychological effects of fatigue and oxygen deprivation. But one fact remained difficult to ignore. German and Japanese pilots were reporting the same things, in different languages, using different terminology. Pilots across the world described glowing orbs of light that tracked them through the skies, and none of them could explain how or why they moved the way they did. Eventually, as the war ended, the Foo Fighters faded from official memory. They were never assigned an official classification. No technology or wreckage was recovered. No explanation stuck. The records remained, but they were buried under the larger machinery of post-war reconstruction, atomic anxieties, and the emerging language of the Cold War. But for those who had seen them, who had flown into empty skies and returned with questions that no one wanted to answer, the memory never faded. The war ended, but the mystery remained, quietly hovering just outside the edge of understanding. As we move into the next chapter, you'll place yourself in that world. The cockpit vibrates beneath your boots. The radio crackles. The world below is dark, and off your right wing, something small and glowing has appeared, damp, and it is keeping pace. Imagine yourself in a canvas cot beneath a thin wool blanket in a canvas tent pitched somewhere on the hard edge of an airfield in occupied France. It's December 1944. You're 23, maybe 26, older than some, younger than others. You've flown 27 night missions. It's 27 nights spent climbing into a cockpit under blackout conditions, taking off into the dark and hoping you'll come back down again in one piece. Your aircraft, a Bristol Beaufighter, is parked just outside. It's a long, narrow brute of a machine with its engines angled slightly down, its belly heavy with radar, its nose darkened by soot and oil. You know its sounds. You know how the fuselage feels when it vibrates under speed. You know the particular smell of cold aluminum, gun oil, and the faint whiff of coffee from a tin you left in the cockpit last week. The air is always damp here. Cold climbs into your boots. Socks stay wet longer than they should. You've given up worrying about it. Instead, you worry about fuel lines. You worry about mechanical errors. You worry about Luftwaffe fighters, ground fire, lightning, ice forming on your wings. And sometimes, only in the quietest moments, you worry about the thing you saw 3 nights ago. You didn't report it. Not exactly. You told your radar operator. He saw it too. You mentioned it in your flight log, but used cautious language. Unidentified light. No hostile action. Shadowed aircraft for duration of patrol. But you know what you saw? It appeared just as you banked east. An orange light, perfectly round, no flicker. It trailed you for several minutes, matching your altitude and speed, hovering behind your starboard wing. When you turned, it turned. When you accelerated, it did the same. When you cut speed, it hovered. There was no engine sound, no exhaust, no obvious body, no wings, no propellers. You radioed command. I told you to maintain course. Huh? And then, just as you thought it would close the distance, it disappeared. No explosion, no retreat, just gone. You didn't speak of it again, 'cause here, at this base, there are other concerns. You have a crewmate to look after. You have pre-flight checks. You have a revolver in your flight suit, not for combat, but for the possibility of capture. You carry a metal flask filled with strong tea because coffee won't stay warm long enough. You have photographs in your locker. Home, a dog, a sister. You try not to think about any of them too much. Every night you prepare the same way. You run your hand along the edge of the wing before boarding, not because it helps, but because not doing it would feel wrong. You strap into the pilot seat, adjust your goggles, check the altimeter. You wait for the ground crew to clear you, and then you lift. The ground drops away with a quiet finality. There's no fanfare, no music, just the growing rush of wind and the hum of twin engines settling into rhythm. You climb into the dark. For the first 20 minutes, it's quiet. Cloud cover below, stars above, the hum of the radar behind you, the silence of 1,000 feet of cold air pressing against your fuselage. You listen to your breathing. You listen to the static of the radio. You remind yourself, this is routine. You've done this before. It's just another night. And then, there it is. Off your wing, a light, same as before, glowing softly. No threat, no message, just watching. Your stomach tightens, not from fear, not exactly, but from the subtle intrusion of something that doesn't make sense, something that doesn't belong. You consider maneuvering, but you don't, not yet. You stare at it, stays perfectly level with you. You tap your radar operator. He nods slowly. He sees it too. Time seems to stretch. The flight continues. Sky doesn't change, but the presence remains. It is not like seeing another aircraft. It is not like watching a bird, or a flare, or a searchlight. It is like being seen in return. Not with eyes, not with intent, but with awareness. And you are left with the cold knowledge that you are not alone. The light will vanish. It always does. You'll complete your mission, return to base, go through debrief. You'll sleep lightly. You'll wake early, okay? You will never quite forget the light that hovered near your wingtip in the vast, indifferent dark. Because it was real. Because it didn't make sense. Because no one else seems to be talking about it, okay? Because it will not be the last time. As we move gently into our final chapter, we leave the cockpit behind and descend into the data, teach into the records, the files, the declassified reports, and skeptical studies. What does science eventually say about the Foo Fighters? And why, after all these years, do so many questions remain? Now that the flight is over and the cockpit is quiet, we can shift gently from experience to explanation. From the moment the first Foo Fighter sightings were reported, officials, scientists, and skeptics alike have tried to answer a deceptively simple question. What did they see? What was it, exactly, that followed those aircraft through the night? What could match the speed and altitude of a fighter plane without any visible propulsion, create no sound, leave no trace, and disappear without a mark? Let's begin with the most grounded theory, weather. One of the earliest explanations considered was ball lightning, a rare atmospheric phenomenon. Ball lightning has been described for centuries. Glowing orbs, usually orange or bluish-white, that appear during or after thunderstorms. They float, they hover, and occasionally they pass through walls or windows before vanishing silently. For decades, ball lightning was considered folklore until enough credible reports led scientists to take it seriously. Could these mysterious lights have been ball lightning caught at altitude? Perhaps, but ball lightning is notoriously unpredictable. It usually lasts for only a few seconds, not minutes, okay? And it's most often associated with ground-level storms, okay? Many Foo Fighter sightings took place on calm, cloudless nights at altitudes well above storm formation. Some even occurred over the ocean, far from any weather patterns. So while the idea of ball lightning offers some comfort, a natural, explainable answer, it doesn't fully account for what pilots described, especially when those lights matched aircraft maneuvers with precision. Another hypothesis, St. Elmo's fire, an electrical phenomenon where static charges build on pointed surfaces, creating a glowing halo, sometimes blue, sometimes violet. Sailors and aviators have witnessed it for centuries, often clinging to antenna tips or propeller blades. It is eerie, beautiful, and silent. Hey, but again, St. Elmo's fire is usually fixed in place, attached to a structure, not something that moves freely through the air. It's not something that peels away from the wingtip and circles the aircraft. And so, some began to wonder, what if these lights weren't natural? What if they were mechanical? During the war, rumors swirled about Nazi technology, jet engines, early missiles, secret weapons designed for confusion rather than destruction. The German Feuerball project, still debated by historians, was allegedly a remote-controlled device meant to disorient Allied pilots. Some theorized that these were early electronic warfare tools able to interfere with radar or visual tracking, but no physical evidence of such a weapon ever surfaced. No designs, no prototypes, no recovered parts, and even German pilots reported Foo Fighters themselves, suggesting that if such a weapon existed, it had slipped beyond the reach of all sides. There were other theories too. Reflections from ice crystals, misidentified stars, afterimages from flight bursts, even fatigue-induced hallucinations, a reasonable possibility given the extreme conditions pilots endured: dehydration, sleep deprivation, oxygen scarcity. These could certainly cause momentary distortions in vision, perhaps even shared between crew members. But most of the pilots who encountered Foo Fighters were trained not just in flying, but in identifying aircraft, terrain, and false signals. Their reports weren't erratic. They were consistent, calm, methodical, and as more time passed, the questions only deepened. By the 1950s, the U.S. Air Force had begun compiling reports under what would later become known as Project Blue Book, an official investigation into unidentified aerial phenomena. While most Foo Fighter reports were excluded, filed as wartime anomalies, their pattern and tone lingered in the background of the growing UFO debate. Some researchers later returned to those World War II era records. They noted how many of the descriptions predated the modern flying saucer craze. That Foo Fighters weren't discs, but spheres. That they weren't always metallic. That they never communicated, never crashed, never stayed long enough to be examined. They simply appeared and disappeared, and left behind a silence that could not be filled with certainty. Even today, the Foo Fighters remain one of the more elusive threads in the long tapestry of aerial phenomena, not because there's no data, but because the data resists conclusion. There were no attacks, no radar locks, no landings, no retrievals, only stories, logs, quiet memories, accounts that, even decades later, are still marked by an odd blend of humility and unease. Pilots rarely claim to understand what they saw, only that they saw something, and that it stayed with them. Perhaps, in the end, that is what makes the Foo Fighters so enduring. They are not defined by spectacle, but by subtlety. Not by conquest, but by curiosity. They were not part of the war, but they moved through it. Not enemies, not allies, simply present. And so, they remain, not in the skies, but in the margins, the quiet footnotes of war records, in the unspoken experiences of those who flew into the night and came back changed. As we come to the end of this journey, we return to stillness. The plane has landed. The engines have cooled. The sky above is once again empty, or at least quiet. And whatever you believe about the Foo Fighters, whether they were light or fire, or something far stranger, they will remain as they always have, just at the edge of what we understand. And now, the sky is calm again. The engines have long since gone quiet. The men who once flew these missions, so young, so steady, so often afraid, have returned to the ground or passed quietly into history. Their stories remain, scattered like soft echoes across the decades, filed in forgotten boxes and remembered in brief conversations over coffee or under stars. The Foo Fighters remain with them and with us, not as definitive events, not as resolved sightings or sensational headlines, but as something quieter, a whisper in the clouds, a moment that didn't belong. Glowing presence that made no demands and left no debris. What makes these stories worth telling isn't whether they were real in the strictest sense. It's that they were reported again and again with calm conviction by people trained not to imagine, but to observe. People for whom the difference between fact and fancy meant life or death, and yet they saw the lights. They saw them in the frozen silence above Europe, over the Black Ocean near Okinawa, the tropical skies of the Pacific. They saw something, and they remembered. In the years that followed, others would speak of sightings. New names would be given, new terms, new theories, new technologies, but the essence would remain the same. Something unexplained, passing silently beside us, asking no questions, offering no answers. Perhaps that's why the story of the Foo Fighters still holds a strange kind of peace. They didn't change the course of the war. They didn't hurt anyone. Okay? They didn't deliver a message or demand to be understood. They were simply there. Small, strange reminder that even at the height of human conflict, mystery has a way of entering through the cracks. Tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine yourself in that cockpit once more. Not in fear, but in wonder. The world below is dark and quiet. The stars above are steady. The wings hum gently beneath your seat. And beside you, just for a moment, a light keeps pace. It will leave soon, always does. Sleep well. Tonight, we set sail on still waters. A journey that begins with a ship, a massive one, setting off on a routine voyage and vanishing without a trace. It was called the USS Cyclops. A Navy collier, slow and sturdy, tasked with hauling tons of heavy metal across the Atlantic during the First World War. There were no distress signals, no sightings, no survivors. Just silence. Some say it was the Bermuda Triangle. Others point to overloaded ballast tanks, steel fatigue, or human error. Whatever the cause, the Cyclops' disappearance remains one of the U.S. Navy's greatest unsolved mysteries. Tonight, we'll explore this event, not through panic or urgency, but slowly, gently, as we sift through shipping routes and officer records, the clank of chains on steel decks, and theories that quietly unravel in time. Let the sound of the rain settle around you like a light blanket. There's nothing to do, nowhere to be. Just listen and drift. Okay, picture, for a moment, the vast Atlantic Ocean in the early years of the 20th century, time before satellites, before radio beacons could pinpoint a ship's exact location with a simple ping. A ship at sea was alone, truly, profoundly alone, surrounded on all sides by miles of rolling water and the slow rhythm of the waves. Now imagine one such ship, 440 feet long, weighed down with thousands of tons of raw, or a Navy vessel, strong and purposeful, not built for speed or beauty, but for labor. The USS Cyclops. She was what's known as a collier, a ship designed specifically to carry coal or fueling the growing military engine of the United States. In March of 1918, she was sailing northward, away from the warm, humid coast of Brazil. She made one final stop in Barbados, and then she vanished. No wreckage, no distress call, no survivors, no trace. This stretch of ocean, the one she disappeared in, would later be called the Bermuda Triangle, a phrase coined decades later in the 1950s to describe a vaguely defined triangle of sea bordered by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, an area whispered about in books, tabloids, and radio specials as if it were cursed or magical. Over the years, more stories would gather in that part of the ocean. Stories of missing planes, ghost ships, compass failures, and eerie fog. The Mary Celeste, Flight 19, the Karawah Deering, all lumped together beneath a single dramatic name, the Bermuda Triangle. But it's important to remember something. In 1918, two of the officers and sailors aboard the Cyclops, this was not a mystery zone. It was simply open sea, blue and predictable. Sometimes calm, sometimes stormy. A watery thoroughfare between the Caribbean and the American coast, well-traveled and deeply necessary. The Cyclops was carrying over 10,000 tons of manganese ore, the essential element used in steelmaking, particularly useful in hardening the steel for weapons, armor, and shipbuilding. It was wartime. The cargo mattered. The schedule mattered. The ship's disappearance was noticed, not because of superstition, but because it interrupted the smooth, heavy machinery of logistics. There were questions. First, quiet, then louder. Had she gone off course? Was she overloaded? Was there an engineering failure? Or, perhaps, a sudden storm? There's no doubt the Cyclops was burdened. Her hull sat lower than usual in the water. Estimates suggest she was carrying significantly more than her rated capacity. Dangerous in almost any condition, and especially risky in an era with limited safety monitoring. The seas along her route could be deceptively calm one hour and deeply unsettled the next. Storms in the Atlantic were, and still are, notorious for forming quickly. The warm, rising air from the tropics, colliding with colder, upper-level winds, often gives birth to sudden squalls. Waves, even in fair weather, could reach staggering heights. A single wave, if timed badly, could lift a fully loaded ship at one end and snap her spine midsection. There will be no time for a message, no flare, only a slow slide into the dark. And yet, in the decades since, people have looked back with a different lens. Not with charts and ballast logs, but with imaginations. The Bermuda Triangle became a story unto itself, a place of myth, mystery, and unanswered questions. Key, with its vanished crew of over 300 men, fit perfectly into that narrative, okay? But was it really so strange? Consider this. In the same region, in the same era, ships sank for reasons as simple as rust, poor welding, miscommunication, or overloaded cargo. Not everything disappears because of the supernatural. Sometimes it disappears because of slow erosion, because someone signed off on too much weight, because a rivet failed quietly below the waterline, because the ocean, in the end, makes no promises. The Navy conducted quiet investigations. Memos were written, logs reviewed, but no firm conclusion was ever reached. Perhaps, none ever will be. What's left is silence. It's a kind that fills the space after something has gone missing and can't be retrieved. A space not only physical, but emotional. A kind of emptiness that lingers. So, when we talk about the Bermuda Triangle and about the Cyclops within it, we must balance myth with mechanism. And remember, the most frightening disappearances are often the ones that leave behind no explanation at all. Pause. Gentle Rain continues in our next segment. We'll turn away from ocean currents and steel hulls and look instead to the man who stood at the helm of this vessel, Captain George Worley, also known by another name. A man with an unusual past, a quiet reputation, and records that raise more questions than they answer. To understand a ship's fate, it helps to understand the man at its helm. When the USS Cyclops departed Rio de Janeiro in 1918, the man in charge was listed as George W. Worley, but that wasn't the name he was born with. His original name, according to scattered immigration and naval records, was Johann Friedrich Wichmann. He was born in Germany, then known as the Kingdom of Prussia, sometime in the mid-1860s. The exact date is hard to confirm. Records then, especially for immigrants, were often handwritten, spotty, and full of variations. Names changed easily. Spellings were inconsistent. At some point in his early adulthood, he made his way across the Atlantic. Like many others in that era, he left behind the old world for the promise of a new one. In the United States, Johann Wichmann quietly shed his German identity. He took on the name George Worley, perhaps to blend in or to start fresh. Some say the name was borrowed from a distant relative. Others say it was entirely invented. What is known is that he entered the U.S. Merchant Marine. Over the years, he climbed the ranks, not quickly, but steadily. He was not particularly charismatic or well known among high officers, but he was competent, detail-oriented, stern, By the time he took command of the Cyclops, he was a man in his 50s, gray at the temples. He wore round spectacles. He spoke with a slight accent that never quite faded, though he rarely said more than he needed to. Some crew members described him as cold, which found him odd, his behavior reportedly more rigid than most. He was known to pace the deck at night, speaking little, but watching everything. There were murmurs, later on, that his loyalties were in question. This was 1918, after all. The United States was at war with Germany. To have a naturalized citizen from Prussia commanding a U.S. Navy cargo ship made some uneasy. The Navy investigated the concern after the disappearance, but no direct evidence of sabotage or treason was ever uncovered. Still, the suspicion lingered. Prior to the Cyclops' final voyage, there had been other concerns. Disciplinary complaints had been filed, minor infractions, mostly. Allegations of poor temper, difficult leadership, and moments of confusion or indecisiveness. No, there were reports, even, that he had once ordered a crewman confined to the brig for speaking out of turn. Perhaps that was simply the style of the times. Or perhaps it was something more deeply rooted. His background remained a curiosity. When his birth name was discovered after the Cyclops' disappearance, the story grew stranger in retrospect. Why did he change his name? Was it to escape a past, to fit in, or to hide? It's possible he had no dark secrets at all, only a life built, piece by piece, as many immigrants did, quietly, methodically, with effort and adaptation. Still, it is difficult not to wonder. As he stood alone on the deck of the Cyclops, the sky graying above and the engines churning below, what was going through his mind? Had he noticed anything odd in the ship's performance? Had he argued with a crewman about ballast weight? Had he glanced one last time at the ocean horizon and felt a sense of unease? We'll never know. There are no letters, no diaries, only paperwork, military logs, personnel records, fragments of interviews given by crew members before that final voyage. The man at the helm of one of the Navy's most enduring mysteries remains, in many ways, a mystery himself. Perhaps that's fitting. In this story, it's not just the ship that disappeared. It's a sense of certainty, a sense of closure. Rain continues to fall softly, steady as breath. In our next segment, we'll step aboard the Cyclops, not as investigators, but as observers, to imagine what life might have felt like for the men below deck. The rhythm of long days, the press of heat, the sounds of engines, and the slow monotony of life on a supply ship, cut off from land and bound only for duty. Imagine yourself standing aboard a steel deck, somewhere off the South American coast in early 1918. There is no shoreline in sight. The sky is pale, almost white in the midday heat. The sun presses down like a weight, and the metal beneath your feet radiates with warmth, gathered over hours. The USS Cyclops moves slowly, never fast, never in a rush. At nearly 20,000 tons when fully loaded, she wasn't built for speed. Instead, she carried mass, or coal, fuel for a war far away. She was a collier, one of the workhorses of the Navy's supply chain. Her job wasn't glorious, but it was essential. Ships like the Cyclops kept battleships steaming, factories turning, weapons being made. And day by day, her crew kept her alive through routine, labor, and the slow passage of time. Below deck, the air was thick and still. The massive cargo holds were filled with manganese, or dark, heavy, and fine as gravel. Even when secured, it shifted slightly with the ship's motion. A low, grinding sound, like sand against metal. It coated everything. The floors, the clothing, the lungs. Below was constant. The ventilation systems, primitive by modern standards, hummed and rattled, but offered little comfort. There was no air conditioning, no relief. Only the occasional burst of wind when a hatch opened above. The crew consisted of over 300 men. They lived in close quarters, slept in narrow bunks, stacked like shelves, stood turns, rotating through watchships, mess duties, and maintenance work. Privacy was a memory. Noise was constant. There were voices, clanging tools, engines pounding deep in the ship's core, and sometimes, only the soft creak of hull plates adjusting to the sea. Meals were served in a simple mess hall, mostly preserved rations, hard bread, and boiled meats. Coffee was always available, though rarely hot enough or strong enough to satisfy. Salt clung to the lips. The temps of rust seemed to settle into teeth, and then there were the storms. The Atlantic is not always gentle. Rain would come without warning, sharp, sudden sheets that hammered the deck like nails. Waves would rise in long, lazy arcs or lash violently against the hull, sending a tremble through the ship's bones. The men below would feel it, a roll in their stomachs, a shift in their footing, a moment where silence settled just before the next groan of steel. They learned not to fear it. They adjusted, because there was no choice. When storm struck, the hatches were secured, the lights dimmed, and the crew rode it out in silence. They listened to the pitch of the engines, to the sound of water striking steel, to the rhythm of a world they couldn't control. Most days, though, were not dramatic. They were quiet, endlessly repetitive. One sailor once described life on a collier as being nowhere while going nowhere for days at a time. And perhaps that's what makes the disappearance of the Cyclops so haunting. Not because it was doomed, but because it was ordinary. Just another voyage, just another supply run. The men on board likely expected boredom more than danger. They might have thought about their homes, their families, or the letters they would write in port. They may have talked about the end of the war, or joked, or played cards, or leaned over the railing just to feel the wind. Whatever their thoughts, whatever their plans, they were swallowed by something silent and vast, not all at once, perhaps slowly, perhaps in a single breath. We do not know what happened on those final days at sea, but we can picture it, the smell of salt and coal, the slow churn of propellers, the heavy sky sagging with cloud, and a ship vanishing without a sound into the folds of history. Soft rain continues, as if echoing that endless sea in our final segment. We'll return to the realm of theories and search efforts. From early Navy investigations to modern sonar surveys, we'll consider what might have gone wrong, mechanical faults, structural flaws, and the haunting weight of manganese ore. When a ship vanishes, the ocean does not keep records. There are no logs in the deep, no trail of breadcrumbs left on the waves, only absence. After the USS Cyclops failed to arrive in Baltimore in March of 1918, the Navy waited a few days at first, then a week, then longer. But no wireless signal had been received. No other vessels had seen her. There were no survivors and no sign of a wreck. Navy launched inquiries and later quiet searches. But this was a time before radar, before satellite imaging, before sonar mapping had matured into a reliable science. They looked with eyes, not instruments. Search parties swept the shipping lanes between Barbados and the eastern seaboard, but the sea is wide, and the Cyclops left no trail, not even a floating crate. Over the decades, multiple explanations have been proposed, some measured, some speculative. One of the most common theories revolves around ballast. The Cyclops was loaded with over 10,000 tons of manganese ore, mineral denser than coal, used in steel hardening. The ship may have been dangerously overloaded, while official logs list a legal cargo amount. It's widely believed that the final load exceeded safe limits. On a ship that large, ballast plays a delicate role, stabilizes the vessel, keeps it balanced amid waves and wind, and properly distributed. If too much weight is concentrated in the wrong part of the hull, the ship becomes vulnerable. The wrong pitch at the wrong moment, and the structure can fail. Naval engineers later theorized that a phenomenon known as hogging or sagging may have played a role. This is when the center of a ship bends upward or downward under uneven loads or wave pressure severe enough the hull can crack, sometimes catastrophically, and in such an event, the collapse would be sudden. No time to send a signal. No time to deploy lifeboats. Others have pointed to possible mechanical failure. The Cyclops was powered by a single screw propeller and 2 triple expansion steam engines. She was old by wartime standards, built in 1910 and heavily used. Maintenance was a challenge, especially during war. If her engines failed in rough weather, she might have drifted without power, vulnerable to broadsiding a wave. It is possible that even a moderate squall, striking at the wrong angle, could have overwhelmed her. There were also early rumors, never substantiated, of sabotage. Because Captain Whirly had German origins, some speculated he may have steered the ship off course, or worse, surrendered it. But investigations revealed no evidence of a German submarine in the area, and no intercepted communications. Historians now largely dismiss these suspicions as products of wartime paranoia. In more recent years, efforts have been made to locate the wreck using sonar imaging. Oceanographers have surveyed portions of the route between Barbados and the Chesapeake Bay, scanning for anomalies. Dozens of unidentified wrecks lie on the seafloor, some commercial, some military, but none have been positively identified as the Cyclops. The Atlantic, in that region, is deep. In many places, it drops off sharply into the Puerto Rico Trench, nearly 28,000 feet deep in places. If the Cyclops broke apart and sank there, locating it would be like searching for a single coin in a mountain valley covered in sand. In 2018, on the 100th anniversary of the disappearance, the U.S. Navy issued a quiet remembrance statement, brief and respectful, acknowledging the mystery, acknowledging the men, acknowledging the silence. There is something deeply human in our desire to know what happened, to complete the story, to locate the missing piece. But the sea does not yield all its secrets. Sometimes a vessel goes down quietly, not with a bang, but a slow unwinding, a gradual give in the structure, a single miscalculation, and then the ocean folds over once more. The wake disappears, and no one is left to tell the tale. But still, you remember the name, the weight of the ship, the theories, the men who sailed her, and the ones left behind, waiting for a knock that never came. Pause. The rain softens. The sound of gentle waves might be imagined in the background. And perhaps, in that remembering, the Cyclops sails on, in thought, if not in water. Not lost, but drifting. A question without an answer, cradled by time. And so, we come to the quiet end of our journey. Not with resolution, but with something softer, calm acceptance that some stories remain unfinished. The USS Cyclops, massive, slow, and steadfast, set out on a familiar route. A cargo of ore in her belly, a crew of over 300 aboard. She was not expected to vanish. She was expected to arrive, but the ocean has its own rhythm, its own rules, and sometimes its silence is complete. We've traveled through stories tonight, of ocean routes and shipping schedules, of captains with changing names, of coal, dust, and coffee in metal mugs, of stormy decks and overheated engine rooms, of sonar sweeps and quiet naval files. And through it all, a single thread has remained, a question gently repeated. What really happened to the Cyclops? Theories persist, some mechanical, some natural, some unprovable. But in the end, the mystery is not what makes this story strange. What makes it strange is how ordinary it was. A cargo ship, a supply route to disappearance, not in the middle of battle, but in the middle of routine. A reminder that the world, even at its most stable, holds quiet uncertainties. And now, you are still, no longer drifting. The rain continues, steady and soft, like the sea itself. Let it fill the space around you. Let it carry you gently into rest. You've been listening to boring and strange sleep stories. If you're still awake, Thank you for spending this time with us. And if sleep has already come, then perhaps out there in your dreams, you're sailing still. Good night.